So, if you're anything like me, you may have wondered why people will do things that they know are wrong. Why a politician will lie under oath with a straight face. Why a doctor might prescribe a pill that he wouldn't even give to his own mother. Why a kid might bully someone that he actually admires. Now, in these moments, it's easy to say, oh, well, they're bad people. They're evil. But that's not always true. In fact, in most cases, they're just responding to something that we don't want to admit is running the entire show. And that's the incentives. For a second, let's pretend that the world doesn't run on virtue, because it doesn't. It runs on incentives, both seen and unseen. Think money, status, approval, identity, guilt, fear. These are the real influencers. The problem is that bad incentives don't just need bad people to do damage. They just need people. People like us. People trying to pay the bills, get promoted, get noticed. The incentives do all the rest. And they do it powerfully. They do it quietly. And they do it relentlessly. That's what incentives do. They shape behavior. That's the whole playbook. And they do it every second of every day, whether we see it or not. In society, incentives are usually talked about like they're this economic concept, something that you hear about in sales rooms or board meetings. But the truth is that incentives are not just some corporate formula. They are embedded in our daily lives. They live inside of our smallest decisions, not just in these big corporate ideas. Why did you skip the gym today? Why did you check your phone during that awkward conversation? Why did you stay quiet when you knew that you should have spoken up? That wasn't laziness. That wasn't cowardice. That was the incentives winning. See, the incentives, they don't just move stock markets, like we're led to believe. They move people. Not in very grand, sweeping gestures, but in very subtle and invisible ways. The kind of ways that you barely notice until they become a pattern, then a system, and then by then it feels like it's just the way that things are. The thing is that all these incentives, they start small. They start in the individual. They start in you. They start in me. Then they scale. One person compromises to keep their job. Another chooses silence to avoid conflict. Another lies just to get a small advantage. Now multiply that by thousands, by millions, and suddenly we're not talking about small personal behavior change anymore. We're talking about institutions, entire industries, government, culture, health. So when we look around at all this chaos, all this corruption, all this polarization, the manipulation, it's easy to fall into this trap of blaming the individual. Well, he's just corrupt. Oh, she's fake. They're evil. They're just evil. But what if they're just following the incentives? What if the system is rewarding the worst parts of us and punishing the best? Because that's what incentives can do when they are misaligned. They don't reward truth, they just reward what works, what spreads. They don't reward virtue, they reward what sells. They don't care what's good. All the incentives care about is what works. However, these incentives can definitely be redesigned. They're not laws of physics. They're human-made, they're man-made. And if a system of incentives can be built, it can also be rebuilt, realigned, rewritten. But we can't do any of that until we see them. We have to see them deeply. We have to notice them. We have to deeply understand them. Because once you start looking, these incentives are everywhere. They're guiding our smallest choices. They're shaping our daily life. They're quietly writing all the rules of the world. So today, that's where I would like to begin. Not with judgment, not with blame, but with taking a look at these incentives and taking a look at what they do. So we'll start off easy. I'll start off with the definition. It's important. We need to state our terms. So an incentive. What is an incentive? Well, an incentive is a thing that motivates or encourages one to do something. Think of words like motive, motivation, impulse, incitement, stimulant, boost. These are all words that can be they're synonyms with the word incentive. So think of a sentence like, the rising cost of electricity provides a strong incentive to conserve energy. If energy prices are going up, can't afford them anymore, there's an incentive to conserve. The incentive to cheat is based on the fear of failing the class. So, why do these incentives matter? Okay, that's the main idea I'm trying to make, is that incentives matter because they shape behavior. An example, think social media. On social media, attention is the currency. There's no money that's made from app downloads. Think Instagram. Mark Zuckerberg. He doesn't make money when you download Instagram. It's a free app. 1 billion people buy the app. They all download it. He's not making any money because it's free. The money is made from ads. Every time that an individual views an ad, he gets paid. So there's an incentive right there to have individuals view as many ads on a daily basis as possible. The priority is to keep you scrolling for as long as possible. It's not to inform you. It's not to make you better. It's not to connect with you meaningfully. It's just to keep you there. And see, the same scenario can be said on the content side of things. See, I just kind of talked about when you're consuming content on Instagram. But if you're creating content, there's also incentives there as well. When you're a creator, you're subject to all sorts of psychological incentives. Likes, shares, views, followers. These things transfer to success and dopamine. I mean, if you're posting on Instagram, success, is those likes, the shares, the views. So it's hard to avoid them. And what this leads to is you post what gives you attention. You don't post what's meaningful. You're incentivized to be extreme, to be polarizing, to clickbait your titles, to lie. And that's not to say that there aren't creators who are making meaningful content. Of course there are. In fact, there's kind of a rise in that right now. But for a while, there was and still is this incentive to be extreme, to be polarizing, to clickbait your titles, because that's what gives you attention. It's what makes you stand out. See, social media rewards the loudest person, not the wisest. An example I like to use is the Logan Paul controversy. Now, a lot of people from my position will bring up people and scenarios like that to try to pull them down and me up. And I'm by no means trying to do that. I just think that for this specific scenario, it's a good example. And if you don't know the Logan Paul controversy, I'm not going to tell you. All right? You can Google it if you so badly want to. It doesn't matter. But the point I'm making is, in this controversy, you look at that from the outside and you say, that's a pretty crazy thing to do. Who would do that? I definitely wouldn't do that. That's crazy. But the incentives pushed him to do that. Think at this time of social media, and even now social media in general, he was trying to grow as fast as possible. Get as many likes, as many shares, as many views, as quickly as possible to grow as fast as possible. Him and his brother, I think, were in this feud, trying to, who's going to grow the fastest, So he was incentivized to do what was going to get the most views, the most shares, to be extreme, to be polarizing, to do things that nobody has ever done before. And in that, those incentives pushed him to do what he did, where you look at that from the outside in and you think, holy cow, why the hell? That's dumb. Why did you do that? And yeah, it was. And the majority of people, even with those incentives pushing them, wouldn't do it. But the point is that the incentives of social media at the time pushed him to make a decision that he wouldn't have really made otherwise, because the incentives were acting on him. These same scenarios are in, police quotas. People say that police have quotas that they're expected to reach a certain quota each month. And if they don't reach the quota, maybe they're paid differently. Or maybe they're just given a side eye in the office, like, you're not doing enough. So then they're pushed to do more, to pull over more people for speeding, to arrest more people, to do things in scenarios and be rougher when they wouldn't really do that, usually, because of these quotas. Healthcare. There's a saying in healthcare that you eat what you kill. And if you're not performing surgeries, you're not doing chemo, you're not giving out meds, giving out treatment, that you're not making enough money, because that's where the healthcare business makes its money. I mean, if you freaking get injured or you get surgery, that's expensive. You can't pay for that outright. You need insurance. So that's where they make their money. That's where the most money is. So in the healthcare, if you're not doing those things, you're not eating what you kill. You're not killing anything. So what are you going to eat? So these incentives lead people to do things that they wouldn't generally do. And I'll get into this a little bit more. But I do like the example that there was this doctor I heard of who prescribed chemo. And this patient was undergoing chemotherapy for cancer. But they later found out that they never had cancer. And that the doctor actually admitted, yeah, no, they didn't. I just prescribed it to him because you eat what you kill. You have to do what you have to do. So these incentives push people to do things that they would not otherwise do. So I want to start off by naming, there are three general types of incentives. You can kind of encompass all incentives into three types from my knowledge. The first one is material incentives. So these are tangible rewards and rewards that have a monetary value or can easily be translated into one. Think money. So material incentives are essentially money. It's money in the form of wages and salaries, scholarships or grants. If you were to join a professional organization or an academic program, think free merchandise or discounts for members of like a retail program. Think like store rewards cards, paid traveler lodging for an employee attending a conference. Say your boss has 1,000 employees, and there's a conference in Pennsylvania, and he wants you guys to go. He wants you to go to the conference. And you, an individual, you're like, I have a wife and kids at home. I don't want to go to this conference. I don't want to go to freaking Pennsylvania. What the hell? So the boss, he says, all right, how about this? I will pay for your lodging. I'll get you a nice hotel. I'll pay for your flight out there, first class. And you can bring your wife and kids. So that when you get there, you come to the conference. For me, I benefit. But you also get a free vacation out of it. And then you look at that and you go, okay, your boss didn't give you money, but he gave you something that's easily transferred into money. You can understand the lodging and the flights, that you can understand the monetary value of that. So that is a material incentive. It gets you to do something. It shapes behavior in a way that it wouldn't have done previously. You wouldn't have gone to the conference unless he paid for that lodging. Another example of this, stock shares for employees from the employer. So these incentives, they have a money value. It's the most common incentive, money. So the next one is a solidary incentive. So these are incentives which are intangible. They're non-material benefits, but they're given to individuals from participating in collective action. So these incentives are all about the sense of belonging. They're all about relationships, identity, shared purpose. The rewards look more like socializing, being a part of something bigger than yourself, like a club or an organization. It can also be seen as social pressure. An example. So all through school, I played soccer, all the way up until my junior year of high school. I loved soccer for the longest time, but as I got in high school, my freshman, my sophomore year, I didn't really like it as much. I would play Xbox all winter, be out of shape. I was in theater, and so it's conflicting. They're both at the same time, and I didn't like running. I just didn't really like soccer. I was out of shape. I didn't enjoy it. I'd get shin splints. If you know anything about that as an athlete, I'd suck. And I'd have them the whole season, so I wouldn't be able to work hard. I wouldn't be able to improve. I just didn't really enjoy soccer. And then from the outside looking in, you look at that and think, oh, you don't like to play soccer? Don't play soccer. It's easy. It's easy to understand. However, the incentive, the solidary incentive of being on the team, the collective action, the hanging out with people and having relationships that I maybe wouldn't have otherwise if I quit soccer. Maybe going to the soccer games, the team dinners, and the social pressure, the pressure to stay on the team. Other teammates, hey, are you playing soccer this year? Yeah, I'm playing. Oh, the pressure. So these things, for a while, the solidary incentives, they kept me on the team. Until eventually, it wasn't powerful enough to keep me there. Eventually, it wasn't, and I quit because the incentive wasn't powerful enough. But for a while, it was powerful enough. And so I continued to play soccer. Another example, think school alumni associations. You might join to stay connected with former classmates. Many people do, to feel part of a shared legacy or a shared identity. You can also think street gangs. You join a gang, young men might join a gang because they crave protection. They crave respect. They crave a family-like bond, especially if they lack those in other areas of their life. They're not getting paid to join the gang. They're not getting a monetary value. They're joining because of the collective action, the relationships. So next is a purposive incentive. And so these incentives are intangible rewards, similar to the solidary incentives, which are gained from acting on your beliefs, your values, your sense of moral duty. These rewards are about purpose. So this is a type of incentive that gets individuals to join an organization, not because of the relationships and the group action, but instead to join the organization because of the commitment to the organization's goals. Thinking about the value that you can give to the world by joining this organization. It's about purpose. And so the key features, it's internal motivation. People act because they believe in a cause. That alone is the incentive. This incentive, it pulls on your heartstrings, and it gives you a sense of moral satisfaction or fulfillment. These incentives, they come from within. And then you can get into the whole, or do they come from within? There's conspiracies everywhere. You can always find, but supposedly these incentives, they come from within. Some examples, think recycling. You don't get paid to recycle. You don't join a club to recycle. Hey guys, let's all get together this Sunday or this Monday and recycle. You don't do it. You recycle because you believe it's the right thing to do. That's the only incentive to recycle. If you didn't think it was the right thing to do, you didn't care that much, you didn't get paid, there was no relationship, you wouldn't recycle. You just wouldn't. Think pro-life versus pro-choice. Both of these sides, they're protesting, they're donating, they're speaking out, and they're doing these things because they believe in the cause. They think that it's the right thing to do. They're not getting paid to speak out, although some of them might be. So they're not doing it for the groupthink and the relationships, although some of them might be. They're doing it for the deep moral satisfaction. Another example, choosing a less profitable but more meaningful job. Some people who work in healthcare, who work in teaching, they choose a less profitable job because the mission matters more to them. I think it's a pretty good consensus. Teachers don't really make enough money. I think a lot of people think that teachers should make more, maybe. But they definitely don't go in for the pay. I've never heard a teacher say that they're doing it for the pay. In fact, they all bitch that they don't make enough. So they do it either for those relationships, that solidary incentive. They love kids, they love the teachers, they want to be around them. Or they do it for the purpose, for the belief that what they're doing is right, that they should help shape the lives of these young men and young women. Another example, a big one, voting in a federal election. No matter the side, people vote because they feel compelled to. They feel like it's the right thing to do. They get satisfaction from doing what is right based on their values. Both sides, the Republicans, the Democrat, anybody, doesn't matter. They're using the argument, vote for me to save democracy. They all do it. You hear everyone say it in politics. These politicians are abusing this purposive incentive to get a vote from you. You're compelled to vote because of incentives. Again, they shape behavior. So we talked about, there's these three incentives. There's the material incentives, money, or easily transferred into a money value. You can understand the monetary value. Then there's solidary incentives, all about relationships, about collective action, about friends, being a part of an organization, those types of things. They're intangible rewards. And then we talked about solidary incentives, purposive incentives, which are about purpose. It's about belief. It's about the moral dignity. These incentives, they pull on your heartstrings, and they come from within. So now I want to talk about some scenarios where several incentives are at play. So, for example, losing a wallet. And again, this is a little tedious. I just kind of want to set a good baseline, what we're talking about. Incentives, how they work, what they do. And then we'll get into some better topics. So, returning a lost wallet. You see a wallet on the ground. It's a nice leather wallet, and there's $200 in there. Immediately, there's a material incentive. $200, $80 wallet. You can understand there's $280 there. Some people would keep the cash. It's free money. They're just going to keep the wallet. Why not? Some people would respond to the purposive incentive. You return the wallet. It's morally right. It's pulling on their heartstrings. They're thinking, oh, if I lost my wallet, I'd want them to return it to me. I mean, it feels good to return it, to see the look on their face when you do it. It's morally right. Two different people. One person responds to the material incentive. The other responds to the purposive incentive. So there's several incentives at play here, and they affect the individual differently. If material wins, you keep the wallet and you walk off. If purposive wins, you return it. Pretty easy to understand. The next one, standing up for a bullied classmate. The purposive incentive. You intervene because it's the right thing to do. It's morally just. You see a kid getting picked on, you feel bad. Your heartstrings are getting pulled on. You intervene. The purposive incentive wins. On the other side, there's another kid. This kid lets it happen. The solidary incentive takes over for him. He lets it happen. He doesn't want to lose popularity. He doesn't want to face backlash with the other classmates and his peers, other friends, other students. So the solidary incentive is winning for him. So these two incentives are at play. Two different people make two different decisions. Tipping at a restaurant is a final tip. If you tip less, maybe you tip less because you can understand the money value. The material incentive is strong for you. Or you tip more even though they don't deserve it because the purposive incentive is acting more. You feel inclined to do it. You feel it's the right thing to do. So from here, I want to pivot a little bit. I just hit my teeth with that. I'm actually sure you heard that. I want to pivot. So incentives by definition are scarce. They always have to be. In this paper that I read by Peter B. Clark and James Q. Wilson, this paper, it was called Incentive Systems, A Theory of Organizations. And I'll link it down below. I'll figure out how to do that. And if for some reason it's not there, there's the title, Incentive Systems, A Theory of Organizations. But in this paper, they talk about the idea that unless a commodity, a status, or an activity is relatively rare, it provides no value. And when you see this in scenarios, it makes sense. Think a business. A business only has so much money that it can hand out in the form of salaries and wages and bonuses. If money's handed out to too many people, the work ethic to earn it is diminished. It'll dissipate. If a company overdoes it, they'll go bankrupt. You can see this if they give out all the money they have, they'll have no money. A university, it can only create so many full scholarships before they water the currency of their prestige value. I mean, if you know a college gives out one full scholarship a year, and you apply for it and you get it, you go, oh my God, that's awesome. You get accepted to a prestigious school and they only give out one full scholarship and you got it. You were the one. You can feel there's a ton of value in that. Holy crap, I did that. But if a school, is giving full scholarships to everybody, I guess this is tough because it's money, so it's not a great example. But it doesn't have as much value. If a teacher gives every student a Student of the Month award, how about this? The award, it loses its motivational power. If you say, this month, if all you guys work hard, I'll give the best student a Student of the Month award. All the kids, they work hard. There's one award coming out. They work hard, they earn it. But then you go, here you go. You give every kid the award. Then next month, those kids aren't going to work hard. Because the kid that busted his ass, sitting at the front of the class every day, wearing his favorite outfit, slicked his hair back, raised his hand before talking, did his homework on time, did the next week's homework early. If he got the same award as a kid in the back, who's snoozing through class, he is giggling with his friends and being disrespectful and missing. There's no value. So it won't encourage effort anymore. So the incentive has to be scarce. Imagine that you tell all your friends that whoever supports you the most gets the title of your best friend. If you start calling all your friends your best friend, then they're not going to try to impress you anymore. They're not going to try to sweep you off your feet with their effort. Because you're calling that guy your best friend too, and he's a douchebag. So what the hell? It has to be scarce, or it provides no value. A final example, it's not the perfect example, but I like it. So in the show, the big stand-up comedian show, Kill Tony, very popular. Um, in this show, and if you don't know, again, I'm not going to explain it. It's popular, probably no. But in this show, when he has a guest on, he introduces them all the time as, today I'm bringing up one of the best comedians in the world, one of my favorite people. I love this guy. He's so funny. He's my favorite person in the whole world. Bring up, and you start thinking, oh God, he's going to bring up Dave Chappelle. Here comes Shane Gillis, Tom Segura, some of these killers. Now, Ron White. And sometimes it is those people. But he uses that title so much, and it's some random. And again, they're hilarious. I'm not dissing the comedians on the show. They're hilarious. But because the title's overused, he says they're the best, they're the funniest, they're my favorite. And he uses that title so much that as a viewer who watches Kill Tony all the time, again, you see the picture in the thumbnail, so it's not the best example. But when he starts saying those things, you no longer are thinking, oh, this is going to be good. He watered the currency. He says it too much. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, it's not the best example. I did say that going in. But again, even for him, those incentives are acting on him. He wants those guests to come back. He wants the people to come into the show, to feel comfortable, to have a good time, to ease in, to relax. What's a good way to do that? Introduce them as one of your best friends, your favorite comedians. Give them this huge title. So I understand that. There's an incentive acting on him as well. So these incentives are everywhere. And that's really the point I'm trying to make. They're everywhere. But that's how incentives work, is they have to be scarce in order to motivate. Long way to make the point, but we got there. So I want to pivot again. I originally had this idea when I was starting to generate, the idea for this show, talking about incentives, because I noticed that incentives are everywhere. So I came up with this idea, this hypothesis, you could say, that incentives cannot be created or destroyed. I was just, sounded cool. I was like, maybe that's true. It isn't. I learned very quickly. But this idea stemmed from my thought that incentives are everywhere. They're always acting on us. They're unavoidable. And also the idea that if you remove an incentive, behavior would be shifted into another incentive. And while the second statement is true, the idea that if you remove an incentive, behavior will be shifted to another one. The original is false. Incentives cannot be created or destroyed. False. Very, very easily false. And so the final verdict is that the destruction of an incentive is possible. In fact, it's quite simple. However, it will result in one of two possible outcomes. And so the first outcome, if you destroy an incentive structure is removed, the first outcome is that the organization, the business, or the activity being conducted will collapse. This can be seen as disengagement. Maybe for an individual, if there's no meaningful substitute, all effort will be withdrawn. An example, I like this example. Old rock stars, hair band, super badass. These rock stars, a lot of them wanted to be paid in coke. They didn't want money. Maybe not a lot of them, it's a fair assessment, but some of them. So they're doing these gigs, they're getting paid in coke. They didn't want cash. They got the cash, they got the girls. They want coke so they can have a good time. That's what they would be paid. Hey, I'll do your gig, I'll do your stadium, but I don't want money. Give me the money in coke. Give me that much coke. But if these stadiums decided we're not going to pay you in coke anymore, they removed the incentive, we're not going to pay you in coke, but maybe they introduce another one. They remove the coke, we're not going to pay you in cocaine anymore, buddy. The cops are on our butt, we'll give you cash. The rock stars might disengage. Maybe cash isn't a meaningful substitute. We don't want the cash, we want the coke. We're not going to do your fucking gig anymore, douchebag, They pull out. We're not doing your gig. And all efforts withdrawn. So if there's not a meaningful substitute, if the incentive is removed, the organization, or in this case, the activity being conducted, the gig, will collapse. It won't happen anymore. And the second thing that can happen is that a new incentive will be introduced, which will re-stimulate the previous structure. Think same scenario. They're being paid in coke. The stadium says, we're not paying you in coke anymore, but we're going to give you cash. The incentive is removed, but a new incentive is introduced which stimulates the same thing. They're like, yeah, actually, I will take the cash. Good thinking. Cops are on my butt too. I'll take the cash, and then they keep doing the gig. So the new incentive is the old incentive's removed, but the new one re-stimulates the previous incentive structure. Hopefully that makes sense. I just thought it was a fun example. So this is getting towards the big point that I want to make, which is incentives themselves have a natural selective process which they undergo in order to decide who the winner is, which incentive wins. Whichever incentive is the most salient, the most powerful, the most compelling to an individual will win within that individual. You, me, your mom, your sister, your brother, your cat. Incentives are on an individual basis, and we all respond differently. Think back to the wallet example. I probably would return it. And if I would steal it, I wouldn't tell the camera, but I'd probably return it. I don't want to keep the wallet. I'd feel bad. Somebody might pick that wallet and be like, hell yeah. And that's respectable. $200, $280. Some people keep the wallet. Totally respectable. But the incentives act differently, so it's on the individual basis. And each individual responds differently. It's very important. These incentives are on the individual basis. They're not on an organizational basis. Individual. Okay, so, but what that means is that incentives within an organization are a percentage play. And it's kind of cool. It's just you don't know it until you start to think about it and you start to see it. So it's a numbers game. On an individual level, multiple incentives might compete. However, again, only the most compelling, the most salient, the most aligned with an individual's goals and morals will influence action out of them. This means that incentives, they start to win by surviving this natural selective process. On an organizational or societal level, incentives become a numbers game. The incentives will act over an entire population, and whichever incentive motivates the highest percentage of individuals to act, or whichever influences the most action out of the highest percentage of people will win. Not because it's inherently better, not because it's virtuous, but because it works on average across the population. And this will happen until a new or a competing incentive comes in and it emerges almost like a virus, and it tries to convince individuals to abandon the dominant system. Quit a job, change your social behavior, change your beliefs, your morals, your values, and instead join a new system. So, on the smaller level, these incentives, which are acting like a virus, they might be successful at winning on the micro scale. They might get a couple people to pop over to the new one. However, they might, if they don't scale largely, they will still be ineffective at the macro level. And so the one with the highest percentage, the highest win rate, the best KD, that one will win. And it will continue to win until it's beat out. So the point is that the most successful incentive, it's important, for these corporations or the populations is the one which is the most influential across the population on average. It's a numbers game. And I'm repeating things, but I think it's important to do that. So this gets into my main point, which I'm calling it incentive Darwinism, because it sounds cool, it sounds sick, it sounds smart, but it's also kind of correct. Darwinism is a term used for evolution and natural selective, in natural selection in nature. I just threw incentive Darwinism. I'm sure someone else has already said that, but it sounds cool. So the idea here is that just because an incentive wins, or is the most salient, it doesn't mean that it is inherently good, correct, or virtuous. It's not true. It's natural selection. These natural selective processes go through and they pick the incentive that works the best, that wins, not that's good, correct, or virtuous. In fact, that's exactly the point that I'm trying to highlight, is that the majority of incentive structures in the world are negatively affecting people. The incentives that win aren't always healthy. They're just the ones which shape behavior the most effectively. An example. In medicine, I kind of said this example earlier. In medicine, you eat what you kill. The incentive. Doctors and hospitals make more money by doing more. more tests, more surgeries, more prescriptions, more treatments. Even in scenarios where it's unnecessary, they make more money by doing more. So as an outcome, within medicine, the financial incentive actually beats out the medical incentive to do what's right. The original incentive that you have to join the medical field to do what's right to help people gets beat out by a new financial incentive. The bad incentive wins. Not because it's healthier, but because it's more profitable. Money is the incentive that runs things right now, unfortunately. So that's the point, is this is a scenario where a bad incentive wins. Another example, my favorite example, overconsumption. So let's say that I create a Tupperware container. All right? And this Tupperware container is the best freaking Tupperware container you've ever seen. It's kind of expensive, but you buy it once and it never breaks. It never melts in the dishwasher. It is perfect. It molds to the best freaking size you need it to be. It's a perfect Tupperware. Keeps your food warm, keeps it cold, never goes bad when it's in there. Cool. But the Tupperware is so good it never breaks. And now you never have to buy another one because it never breaks. So my company, Tupperware X, Tupperware my company, skyrockets to the top of the charts. It's incredibly popular. Everyone's buying my Tupperware. But because it doesn't break, it doesn't go bad, people never buy another one. They never buy another Tupperware container. So now I go bankrupt. I'm not making more money. People were investing into my company. I've got shareholders. They're not making money either because I'm not making more money. I flatline. So what happens is it creates an incentive to make a worse product. So it's really good on the front end, but then it goes bad and they have to buy another one. So you're benefiting, your shareholders are benefiting, the whole deal. And we see this example with iPhones. I think back to the iPhone 4. I remember that the battery was bad in my dad's. It needed a new battery. It cracked. He just needed some work done on the iPhone. And he didn't want to buy a new iPhone. So he went to the store, he got a kit to fix it, and he unscrewed it. There were screws, so he took it apart, he watched a YouTube video, he fixed his phone. Spent like $30-$40. Fix it, cool, now it lasted a lot longer. But to Apple, why would they let you fix the phone when they can make it impossible for you to fix it, so you have to pay them to fix it, or just buy a whole new one outright? So what they do now is they glue your phones together. There's no screws in these puppies, and if they are, they're on the inside. They glue them together so that when the battery goes bad or the screen breaks, you can't fix it for $40. You have to pay them $40 plus an additional $50 for the parts to fix it. So the bad incentive, the incentive to create bad products that go bad, or in this case, make it so you can't fix it, it wins. And as a result, people are throwing their phones into landfills, littering the planet, when you could be fixing it and conserving resources and money, you don't, because there's incentives to do that. And I'm not saying that these people are evil. In fact, that's actually the opposite. I'm saying the incentives lead people to do things that are bad. You can also see this in addictive food engineering. The incentive. Food companies make more when you eat their product more, when you eat more of their food. That's easy to understand. So as an outcome, these companies are going to optimize the food to have high concentration in sugar, in fat, in high fructose corn syrup, salt. Even if as a result it makes people unhealthy, they don't care because they're going to benefit. They're going to make more money when you eat more of their chicken nuggets that taste so freaking good and you don't know why. The bad incentive wins. Your health and your biology gets hijacked because it's profitable. I know it's possible. We're freaking humans. I'm posting a damn podcast online. I know it's possible with the technology we have to make everything that we eat healthy. And everything that's bad, if you just freaking get rid of. Make shit that's all good, all yummy, but healthy. I know it's possible. I freaking know it is. I'm putting a podcast on the internet. We make TikToks. We have cars that freaking unlock with midair. We do cool shit. But the incentives aren't aligned for us to do cool things that benefit us 100% of the time. They're benefiting the elite or whatever. We don't need to get into all that stuff. But just like evolution doesn't select traits based on what is noble, what is virtuous, incentives don't reward what's good. They reward what works. And sometimes what works is actually pretty harmful. In these cases, the food that we're eating. The iPhones that we can't fix, they're glued, making a Tupperware container that fucks up in a year, so you have to buy a new one. These things aren't good, but the incentives lead people to do that. And I think that you can see this in a lot of the big problems that we face today. Online division, power in government, broken healthcare, the war on drugs, overconsumption, like I just talked about. These things aren't caused by evil. They're not caused by evil people. They're caused by bad incentives, which outcompeted the better ones. This natural selective process, this incentive Darwinism that's acting over these incentives, are making the bad incentives more successful. And I think that too much blame goes to the individuals when the blame should be given to these incentives. We hear this all the time. Oh, he's evil. These people are evil. They're just bad. They're, like these words I used earlier, they're fake. I think that we're just the same that we are. They're being acted on by incentives. And these incentives are bad. And it's weird to look at this. Like, how did we get these incentives this way? And I think they need to be changed. I know when I was a little kid, maybe you as well, I'm sure. When you're a little kid, you are old when you're old enough to understand that the world is much crazier than you thought it was, much bigger, much more amazing than you thought it was, but not yet old enough to understand the details. I remember that age, and I remember thinking, like, I can't wait to get older just to understand, to like know the truth, to understand. I've always said this: when I die, what I want to know is I just want to know all. Obviously, that's not going to happen. I'm not going to become God. But when I die, I love the idea of just understanding everything, knowing the truth about history, what things actually were, just understanding it all, because it's so cool. And I remember as a kid thinking, I can't wait to get older and understand some more of these things, how the humans work, like, because we're doing cool stuff. I can't wait to understand it. And then you get older and you realize that we're kind of just freaking stupid. We are, throwing stuff away that can be fixed because it's profitable for the top people to make us buy new ones. And so we're throwing them away. Trash is ending up in the oceans. We're littering the planet. Some people say that the global warming, the earth is melting. We're doing stupid things. We're eating foods that are bad for us and making us unhealthy. Making us fat. Things that we shouldn't be doing. We're scrolling on our phones for hours and hours a day because it's addictive. Because the only job of these companies is to keep you scrolling for as long as possible so they make money off ads. The more ads you see, the more money they make. So it's not perfect. It's not glamorous. It's kind of disappointing when you see that we're just stupid. It's like we have the possibility to do amazing things. Like the example that I said with the food. There's no way that we can't just create food that's perfect and good for you and fuels you and gives you energy and electrolyte. I'm sure we can. Actually, I'm certain that we can. And that we can make it cheap enough for it to be in everyone's hands. There's no reason that liquid IV should be as expensive as it is. That the only foods that are good for you, that are healthy, are expensive. So everyone ends up buying the cheap shit that tastes good. There's no reason. Like, I'm sure that we can figure things out. So it's disappointing to get older and see that. So that's kind of the rubric of this show. I want to talk about the incentives, how they're affecting the world, and I want to dig into topics that are a little bit more fascinating. This was a bit of a baseline. Maybe boring, but just a bit of a baseline to kind of jump in and understand what I'm going to be talking about. So next week I'd like to get into something a little bit more fun, and that's the food industry. How one of the most basic human instincts, eating, has been hijacked by these incentives. Hijacked by incentives that reward addiction over health, profits over nutrition, obesity over well-being. So everything from the way that food's engineered, to how it's marketed, how it's distributed. You'll probably see the pattern play out again and again and again in these episodes. The same kind of things brought up. The fact that the winning incentives aren't the ones which nourish us, they're just the ones which hook us, which win. The incentives that win aren't the most virtuous, they're just the ones which are the most successful, that work, that shape behavior the most. Again, that's what incentives do. They shape your behavior. So next week I'm going to talk about the food industry because it's cool to me. I got maybe a couple books I'm going to read. I'm going to do some research, put something together, talk about it, because I know that incentives are acting on it. And so that's the first thing I'm going to talk about. Well, hopefully you enjoyed this. A little bit choppy, maybe a little raw. There were a few cuts in here for some technical things. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed it. Next week, it's going to be up. Maybe it won't be up, but it will be. I'm going to get one up every week. I'll see you there. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully this was cool. I had fun. So let's get into it. Let's get into it a little bit more. But yeah, we're going to talk about incentives. Doesn't get talked about enough. So I'll see you next week. Thank you guys very much. Peace out.